She was 6 months pregnant, standing at the gates of the home her ex-husband stole from her. Not the kind of cold that bit through coats or turned breath into mist, but the kind that started in the bones, the kind you felt when you were walking back into a place you swore you'd never step foot in again. Samantha Price stood at the wrought iron gates of the house that used to be hers. Once she had walked through them with keys in her pocket, groceries in her arms, and dreams spilling out of her smile. A kingdom built on lies. She rested a hand on her belly, feeling the faint kick of the life growing inside her. The call had come earlier that day from her old neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly. If he wanted to flaunt his new mistress, Chloe, in the home Samantha had helped design, renovate, and love into existence, he would do it with every light blazing. At first, Samantha felt the familiar wave of hurt, the sharp sting of betrayal she'd been nursing since the divorce papers were signed. But it didn't last. The pain was quickly replaced by a calm, icy focus. She'd been waiting for this moment. Because while Michael thought he had won, taking the house, the furniture, and the life they'd built, he had no idea that his grip on it was already slipping. Every brick, every pane, every blade of grass on the manicured lawn. Not because she wanted it, but because she could take it, and she would. Michael had defaulted on several clauses in the property settlement, clauses he had smugly dismissed when their lawyers argued them in court. Now those clauses were the noose tightening around his perfect little neck. The evening air was still except for the faint hum of bass from inside. Michael in a navy suit jacket, no tie, hair perfectly styled like he just stepped out of a magazine spread. Chloe, wearing a silk slip dress in a dangerous shade of red, perched on the arm of his leather chair. Michael's business associates, by the look of their tailored suits and designer watches. Glasses of champagne sparkled in their hands. The living room looked staged for a lifestyle ad. Crystal decanters on the bar, fresh flowers in vases Samantha had picked out years ago, the Persian rug they'd bought together in Italy. She could feel her heart pounding, but it wasn't fear. A memory flashed, unbidden. "This is our forever home," he'd said, his arm around her waist. Forever had lasted exactly 8 months before she caught him in an affair with a marketing assistant from his company. And here she was, not broken, not begging, but ready to end the parade he was playing. She climbed the porch steps, her heels clicking against the wood. She didn't knock. Then came the voices, laughter, the faint clink of glass. The warmth of the house wrapped around her, bringing with it the ghost of 100 memories. The room went silent the moment she stepped in. The sound of her heels on the hardwood echoed in the tense air. "I won't take up much of your evening," she said, her voice calm and even. "I'm here on business." He didn't take them at first, just stared at her like she'd sprouted wings. "What is this?" he finally asked, his voice low. The room seemed to shrink. Someone coughed. Michael laughed, but it was hollow, strained. "Oh, I'm very serious," Samantha said, her gaze steady. "The locks change in 72 hours. A ripple of murmurs went through the group. Samantha didn't wait for Michael's response. "It's your last one here." She was 32 with warm hazel eyes and an easy smile that made people feel comfortable around her. Friends described her as the kind of person who remembers your coffee order forever. The one who sent thank you notes for even the smallest kindness. Before Michael, Samantha had been a junior interior designer at a mid-sized firm in the city. She'd worked her way up from the receptionist's desk, teaching herself drafting software at night after long days answering phones. It was at one of those client meetings in a newly purchased penthouse apartment that she met Michael Price. He was confident in a way that made you believe he could handle anything. Coming from a childhood where affection had been scarce and stability even scarcer, Samantha soaked it in like sunlight after a long winter. When they found the colonial-style house with its white columns and wraparound porch, it felt like the final piece of their fairy tale. Michael encouraged it at first, bragging to his friends about her amazing design eye. Still, she believed they were happy. It was a lipstick stain on one of his dress shirts. Not her shade, not her brand. She wanted to believe him, so she did. The second clue came weeks later. A perfume scent on his jacket that didn't belong to her. This time, he rolled his eyes, called her paranoid, and reminded her that jealousy wasn't attractive. Then came the third clue, and there was no mistaking it. She had stopped by his office to surprise him with lunch, only to find the door locked and the blinds drawn. Michael had brushed past her without explanation, muttering something about urgent business. That night, he didn't come home until after midnight. Instead, she began quietly documenting everything. Every suspicious text, every unexplained charge on the credit card. Every night he didn't come home. She called an attorney. And she began to see Michael for who he truly was. A man who thought he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. This baby was hers, a piece of her she would protect at all costs. Michael's involvement was secondary. She told him over dinner a week later. But the glow faded quickly, replaced by a tight smile and a muttered, "That's great, Sam." From then on, he became even more distant. The settlement had given him temporary rights to the house, a detail that had stung deeply, but Samantha's attorney had insisted on adding clauses to the agreement. The clauses were simple. The property must remain in good repair, mortgage payments must be made on time, and the home could not be used for business or events without Samantha's written permission. He'd rented out the space for parties, let the landscaping go wild, and fallen behind on payments in favor of funding lavish weekends with Chloe. For days, she debated it. She didn't want the house because she still loved it. She wanted it because it was hers, because he had taken it without respect or gratitude, and because she was done letting him believe there were no consequences for his actions. Now, standing in front of the mirror in her small rental apartment, Samantha had studied herself before leaving for the confrontation. Her pregnancy glow softened the sharpness in her cheeks, but her eyes were different, clearer, harder. She wore a fitted black dress under a camel coat, low heels that clicked like punctuation marks on pavement, and a scarf her grandmother had given her. She looked herself in the eye and whispered, "You're not the same woman who walked away with nothing." That was the woman who had walked up to the gates of the house that night, ready to deliver not just a legal notice, but a message. And as much as Michael thought this was about property, Samantha knew it was about something bigger. Reclaiming her dignity, one signed document at a time. The Price house sat like a jewel on the edge of the cul-de-sac, its wraparound porch spilling warm light onto the manicured lawn. She'd walked those hallways barefoot at midnight, fixing a leaky faucet while Michael slept in. She'd scrubbed wine stains from that porch after their first summer party. She'd tended the roses out front, not a landscaping crew. Every polished surface had once been touched by her hands. Tonight, the place looked alive in a way that felt wrong. Too loud, too crowded. Michael had thrown a small gathering, though small in his vocabulary meant 30 people with expensive clothes and shallow smiles. Cars lined the driveway and spilled onto the street. Sleek imports and glossy SUVs that screamed money. Jazz spilled from hidden speakers, mingling with bursts of laughter and the faint pop of champagne corks. The air carried the rich aroma of catered hors d'oeuvres, truffle canapés, bacon-wrapped scallops, imported cheese. No family photos on the console, no basket for shoes by the door. The Persian rug she'd loved was replaced by a sleeker, colder runner. It felt like a showroom, not a sanctuary. She could see into the living room from the foyer. The oversized leather sectional, one of the few pieces of furniture she'd agreed to leave behind, was pushed against the wall to make space for clusters of guests. Michael stood near the fireplace, holding court as if he were the star of some glossy lifestyle spread. Chloe, in that scarlet slip dress, hovered beside him, touching his arm when she laughed at his jokes. On the coffee table sat a champagne tower, tiered crystal glasses waiting for the next dramatic pour. But Samantha knew how much of it was smoke and mirrors. She knew the landscaping service had been cancelled for months before he hired someone for this event. Conversations faltered, heads turned. For a heartbeat, something like panic flickered there, quickly replaced by a practiced smile. "Samantha," he said, loud enough for the nearest guests to hear, as if her presence were merely unexpected, not unwelcome. "Oh, how quaint," she said, looking Samantha up and down. "Didn't think this was your kind of crowd anymore." Samantha didn't answer right away. The guests, the decor, the way people shifted uncomfortably in the silence. She could feel the power tilting just a little as eyes moved from Michael to her, curious and cautious. The dining room beyond the living space was set for 12. The table was draped in white linen and set with gold-rimmed china. Samantha's favorite, though she doubted Michael even remembered that. She stepped into the living room fully now, shrugging off her coat. Samantha didn't care. "This is a private event," Michael said, his voice even, but tight. Samantha arched a brow. "In my house?" "It's not your house anymore." Her lips curved just slightly, a smile without warmth. "We'll see about that." Before he could respond, she glanced toward the staircase. The little nicks in the banister were still there, too, from when Michael had insisted on moving a sofa upstairs without professional help. Some were watching with thinly veiled fascination, others pretending to sip their drinks. Samantha could guess the conversation. "If you've come to make a scene, Samantha, don't. This is business." "You don't want a scene, Michael? Then maybe you shouldn't have moved your mistress into my living room." "We were just enjoying a lovely evening until you barged in," she said. "Lovely evenings have a way of ending," Samantha replied, her tone still calm. From the kitchen, a caterer emerged with a tray of petit fours, clearly unsure whether to set them down or retreat. Samantha took a slow step toward the coffee table, her gaze sweeping the champagne tower, the crystal bowls of caviar, the strategically placed magazines featuring Michael's company. Even before the money, before the tailored suits and the corner office, he possessed a knack for charming people into giving him what he wanted. In his 20s, it was free drinks, skipped lines, and favors from friends who believed in his big plans. In his 30s, those plans had materialized. He moved between groups with a practiced grace, topping off wine glasses, shaking hands, leaning in with that magnetic smile. He laughed easily, but it was the kind of laugh that came from calculation, not joy. Every joke, every anecdote was tailored to keep the spotlight squarely on him. If Michael was the conductor of tonight's performance, Chloe was the centerpiece, a stunning soloist everyone couldn't help but watch. She was 29 with the kind of beauty that turned heads even in a room full of designer dresses. Long legs, glossy chestnut hair, skin like porcelain under the warm glow of the chandeliers. Chloe knew exactly how to use that attention. She was part of the brand he was selling. The truth, of course, was far less glamorous. She'd found her shortcut in Michael. At first, it was harmless enough. Then came the gifts, jewelry, handbags, a new car. Always accompanied by whispered promises about a future that didn't exist yet. And tonight, she wore it like a second skin. From her vantage point near the fireplace, Samantha could see the dynamic between them clearly. Or at least that's how he wanted it to look. But Samantha knew that Chloe wasn't orbiting him out of devotion. Chloe slipped an arm through his, resting her other hand on his chest. "As most of you know," Michael began, "this home has been the heart of so many wonderful memories for me." Chloe's eyes sparkled as she tilted her head toward him, basking in the attention. Let him talk. Let him show everyone exactly how pleased he was with himself. Michael launched into a story about a recent deal, a luxury condo project in the city. "Almost. She left ages ago," Chloe was saying. Samantha didn't flinch. Michael, meanwhile, was moving toward the study. It was here that Michael had signed the contracts for their first joint property investment. Michael thrived in rooms like this, private, powerful, a place where deals were made. But tonight, the study was just another prop in his performance. He leaned against the desk, speaking in low tones to a man Samantha recognized as his lawyer. There was a flash of irritation on Michael's face before he smoothed it over with that practiced charm. Watching him now, Samantha realized something important. Michael had built his entire persona on the belief that he was untouchable, that no one could outmaneuver him, that charm, money, and a willing partner on his arm could erase any wrong he'd done. Chloe rejoined him by the study door, her hand slipping into his. They exchanged a quick, conspiratorial smile before heading back toward the living room. It was almost funny, Samantha thought, how sure they both looked, how convinced they were that this was their kingdom, their audience, their stage. They had no idea the curtain was about to fall. Samantha stood near the center of the living room now, the hum of conversation reduced to a faint buzz behind the sharp pulse in her ears. "Samantha," he said in a tone that was meant to sound welcoming. "Why don't we take this outside? We can talk privately." She didn't move. "Why would I do that? You invited all of them," she gestured to the room, "to watch this performance. Seems only fair they see the ending." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Chloe, still perched at Michael's side, tilted her head in mock concern. She pulled out the manila folder and set it squarely on the glass coffee table, directly between the champagne tower and a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres. The sharp snap of the clasp echoed in the quiet room. Michael's jaw tightened. "What is this?" "Your notice to vacate," Samantha said, her voice even. "You have 72 hours to remove yourself, your belongings, and anyone else who doesn't belong here." The words landed like a punch. Several guests exchanged wide-eyed glances. One man actually choked on his champagne. Chloe let out a short laugh. "Oh, I can," Samantha interrupted. Michael violated 3 separate clauses in the settlement agreement. The silence was deafening. Samantha didn't flinch. "Is this true? You don't own the property?" Michael's face reddened. "This is not the time or the place." "It's exactly the time and place," Samantha said, her voice cutting through his. "You built your reputation on appearances, Michael. Maybe it's time everyone sees the truth." Chloe shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the guests as if willing them to side with her. "This is pathetic," she spat. Samantha's lips curved in the faintest smile. Michael's mask cracked. "You're doing this because you're bitter," he said, his voice sharp. Samantha stepped closer, her belly brushing the edge of the coffee table. "No, Michael. I'm doing this because you forgot who you were dealing with." For a long beat, no one spoke. Then a woman near the back, someone Samantha recognized from past charity events, cleared her throat. The remaining guests hovered awkwardly, torn between morbid curiosity and the instinct to flee. Samantha turned to leave, but Michael's voice stopped her. "Then I'll see you there. But in the meantime, the sheriff will be here on Friday to change the locks. Your choice whether you walk out with dignity or get escorted." Samantha caught the word, "which." But neither of them moved. Each step a reminder that she was in control now. As she reached the gate, she exhaled slowly, her pulse finally beginning to steady. Not just the house, but a part of herself Michael had tried to erase. She knew the party would crumble. The guests would leave. Michael and Chloe would argue, and word of tonight's scene would travel faster than any press release. And that was just the beginning. By the time Samantha reached her car, the rush of adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation began to drain from her body. For a moment, she didn't start the engine. Michael had broken the rules. The house was hers by law. But right now, with her heart pounding and her baby shifting restlessly inside her, the certainty she'd felt only minutes ago began to blur. She could picture it already. He'd fight, and he'd try to hurt her in the process. She leaned forward, resting her forehead on the cool leather of the steering wheel. For a brief, terrifying moment, she wished she'd just stayed home. Wished she hadn't walked into that house, hadn't felt every eye on her, hadn't put herself in the middle of a public scene. By the time she reached her small apartment, the adrenaline had faded completely, leaving only exhaustion. Here, it wasn't cold or staged, but tonight it wasn't comforting either. She kicked off her shoes and sank onto the couch, staring at the darkened TV screen. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. One glance at the screen told her it was her attorney. She couldn't talk right now. Not about legal paperwork, not about next steps. She just wanted quiet. She thought about the look on Michael's face when she'd handed him the eviction notice. That flash of panic before he'd masked it with anger. What if he contested the eviction? Was she strong enough to fight? Her hand instinctively went to her belly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She thought about her mother, who had always told her that standing up for yourself wasn't easy, that it often came with loneliness. A tear slipped down her cheek, hot and fast. She didn't bother to wipe it away. She cried for the years she'd spent believing Michael's lies, for the home she'd built with love, only to have it turned into a stage for his ego, for the fear that maybe even now she wasn't strong enough to face him. She finally leaned back against the couch, her breathing ragged. The apartment was still quiet, but the stillness no longer felt oppressive. It was just empty. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from her attorney. "Call me tomorrow. We'll prepare for pushback. Don't worry." She couldn't think about pushback tonight. Michael's arm was around her, but he wasn't looking at the lens. It hurt to see that picture now, but it also reminded her that there had been a time before him, and there would be a time after. Eventually, she stood and made her way to the bedroom. Sleep didn't come quickly. Her mind kept replaying the confrontation in the living room. When she did drift off, her dreams were restless. That was who he was. A part of her wanted to crawl under the covers and hide, but another part, quieter, steadier, told her she couldn't. Now she had to see it through. Still, as she pushed herself up and swung her legs over the side of the bed, she felt the heaviness settle back into her bones. People walking dogs, kids riding bikes, as if nothing had happened. She wasn't ready yet, not to fight, not to face him again. But she would be. Just not today. 2 days after the confrontation, Samantha sat in her attorney's office, a sleek corner suite with glass walls that overlooked the city. Across from her, Lauren Hayes, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a reputation for dismantling arrogant men in court, tapped a pen against the top page. Michael's lawyer sent this over late last night. They're contesting the eviction. A half-hearted proposal that would let Michael stay in the house for another year while paying a reduced rate on the mortgage. He thinks I'm desperate enough to agree to this. Samantha leaned back in her chair, the faintest glint in her eye. He has no idea, does he? Not unless you've told him. Lauren shook her head. Michael always assumed I was just scraping by. He never once asked about my work after the divorce. Probably because he thought it was nothing important. When she'd left the marriage, she hadn't just taken her clothes and a few personal belongings. It had started small, consulting for boutique hotels on their interiors, helping young families design warm, functional homes. But word had spread quickly, and Samantha had landed 2 major contracts with developers in the city. Her designs were now featured in architectural magazines, and her bank account, once frighteningly low, was comfortably in the 7 figures. Using the settlement money Michael had so smugly assumed would barely last her a year, she'd made quiet investments in real estate, and in a small but promising tech startup run by a friend from college. Every move was calculated, every dollar placed with care. She'd kept it all off Michael's radar on purpose. Lauren flipped open another folder and slid it toward her. Inside was a formal notice of funds, a declaration that Samantha had more than enough capital to buy out the remaining mortgage in full, pay all court fees, and still have a sizable cushion left over. Once we file this, Lauren said, it changes the dynamic completely. Samantha ran her fingers over the page, feeling the smooth weight of the paper. He's going to hate this. As she sipped, she began sketching ideas, not for a client, but for herself. Michael had tried to write her out, to reduce her to a cautionary tale whispered about at dinner parties. Now she'd be the one turning the page. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won? This isn't over." No signature, but she didn't need one. She stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back a simple reply. Bank statements, investment reports, the signed contract from her largest client, worth more than Michael's last development deal. Let him see now. The next morning, she met Lauren again to finalize their next move. They would not only reject Michael's counteroffer, but file a motion for expedited possession, backed by proof that Samantha could take on the mortgage herself without delay. It was aggressive, decisive, exactly what Michael wouldn't expect. When the paperwork was ready, Samantha signed it with a steady hand. As she walked out of the courthouse later that week, she caught her reflection in the glass doors. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time, she wasn't just reacting to Michael's moves. She was making her own, and she had no intention of losing. It wasn't that she'd suddenly become someone else. The hazel eyes were still hers. But there was a different energy now. A steadiness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. That woman was gone. She got her hair trimmed into a sharper, more modern cut, the kind that framed her face and made her eyes stand out. A navy blazer with clean lines, dresses that skimmed her growing belly but still looked commanding, low heels that clicked with authority. She needed people to see it, to see that she was building a life and taking back her power at the same time. Her transformation wasn't just about appearance. She began her mornings differently, starting with a run walk in the park, breathing in the cold air until her head felt clear. She ate better, cooked meals that nourished her instead of grabbing whatever was easy. Her assistant, Jenna, noticed the change almost immediately. "You are different," she said one morning as Samantha breezed into the office. "In a good way, I hope," Samantha replied, hanging her coat on the rack. During their next meeting, she leaned back in her chair and studied Samantha for a moment before saying, "You're ready for this. I can see it." "I am," Samantha said. Normally, she would have declined. She wasn't interested in small talk and champagne flutes, but she knew Michael would be there. He never missed an event where real estate money was in the room. The night of the gala, Samantha dressed with intention, a deep emerald gown that fit her perfectly. A sleek updo, diamond studs she bought for herself after landing her first major contract. She wasn't the ex-wife people whispered about anymore. She was someone they wanted to know. And then she saw him. Michael was near the bar holding a glass of scotch, Chloe on his arm in another dangerously low-cut dress. He looked the same. He'd heard about the motion they'd filed. It was enough. Samantha didn't approach him. She let him watch her move through the room, greeting people, laughing easily, speaking with the hotel owners who were among her biggest clients. He raised his glass slightly in a mock salute. She gave him a polite nod, nothing more, and turned back to her conversation. Back then, she'd been running on anger and adrenaline. Now, she was standing on solid ground. It was about proving it to herself. And she wanted that moment to be unforgettable. She began planning for it in quiet, meticulous detail. Not just the legal logistics, but the optics. Who would be there, how it would happen, what she would say. "When we serve the final order, I want it delivered in person," she said. "You sure?" "Yes," Samantha said. In the days that followed, Samantha prepared like she was going into battle. She reviewed the order until she could recite the key points from memory. She didn't want shouting or drama. She wanted precision. She also made a few calls to people she knew would make Michael sweat. A well-known property investor who'd once considered partnering with him. Not to tip them off directly, but to invite them to a housewarming she would host once the property was back in her possession. Word would spread, as it always did. By the time Friday arrived, the day the sheriff would change the locks, Samantha was ready. The transformation was complete. The sun was just starting to set when Samantha pulled up to the Price house. The porch lights were already on, casting a golden glow over the white columns. It looked warm, inviting, exactly the kind of illusion Michael loved to maintain. She could hear the hum of voices from the driveway. Through the front windows, she spotted movement. Guests milling about, glasses in hand. Of course, he'd be hosting something tonight. Samantha stepped out of her car, heels clicking against the pavement, her black coat flaring slightly in the cool breeze. She crossed the lawn with measured steps, her eyes fixed on the door. The smile that flickered across her lips was smug and thin. "I'm here for Michael. He's busy." Chloe didn't answer, but Samantha stepped forward into the light. A moment later, Michael appeared in the foyer, wearing another one of his tailored suits. Samantha smiled faintly. "We're in the middle of something," he said through clenched teeth. "Then everyone can witness this." She walked to the center of the living room, setting her bag down on the coffee table. "This," she said, holding up the envelope, "is the court's order for possession of this property, effective immediately. The locks will be changed within the hour. This is harassment. You can't." "I can," Samantha said, cutting him off. "And I have. The court agrees. This house is mine again." "Is that true, Michael?" His silence was all the confirmation anyone needed. Chloe crossed her arms, trying to look unaffected. Samantha's eyes flicked to her. "This," she gestured to the room, "is just a bonus." Stepping in through the open door, he held a set of documents in one hand and a locksmith's kit in the other. "You can't just." The deputy's voice was firm but professional. "Court order says we can, sir. You'll have time to collect personal belongings, but the property changes possession tonight." A stunned silence filled the room. A few slipped toward the door, eager to avoid being part of the fallout. Michael's jaw worked as if he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. His eyes burned with a mix of anger and something else. Michael muttering curses, drawers opening and slamming shut. She didn't need to see it. She knew exactly what was happening. The collapse of a man who had built his life on a foundation of arrogance and assumption. The sound of tools clicking against the front door filled the air. "Yes, it is." She didn't raise her voice. The finality in her tone was enough. As the locksmith finished, the deputy handed her the new keys. She closed her fingers around them, feeling their solid weight. Not a sharp, defiant smile, but a genuine one. The house was quiet again, empty. The pretentious decor was still there, but it didn't matter. In the foyer, she paused and looked toward the door, imagining the faces of the guests as they left, the whispers that would spread, the reputations that would shift. Michael had been publicly stripped of something he valued more than money, his image. It was softer now, less filtered through the haze of staged perfection. Samantha stood barefoot in the foyer, a mug of coffee in her hands, listening to the quiet. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like peace. A year later, that peace was her new normal. Samantha sat on the wraparound porch, a rocking chair replacing the stiff outdoor furniture Michael had bought. In her arms, her 6-month-old daughter, Lily, slept soundly, her small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She hadn't heard much about Michael. The gossip mill said his company had folded after key investors pulled out, and that Chloe had left him months ago. He was just a memory, a closed chapter in a book she no longer read. She realized she had found her forever after all. She had built it herself, on a foundation of strength, dignity, and a love that was real. If this story of strength and new beginnings resonated with you, Please show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel.